House will come to order. Members, please take your seats. Sergeant Arms.
The House is now in session. All persons not entitled to privileges on the floor, please retire to the gallery.
The members will rise and be led in prayer by the Honorable James P. Jimmy Massey III, the gentleman from Henrico, and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. I'm from Stafford. That'll be led by the gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Let's bow our heads in prayer. Lord, my House colleagues have so many distracting thoughts on their minds. Their legislative and financial bills, their families, their day jobs, their political futures, their strained relationships, their broken relationships, and snow removal. Lord, given our cluttered and distracted minds, please just give me their undivided attention for the next 30 seconds. Lord, we love you with all our hearts, with all our minds, and with all our souls. You are the eternal, infinite, omniscient, and sinless God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. Lord, in stark contrast, we are finite, limited knowledge, sinful human beings. Given that, Lord, we implore you, we beg you in all circumstances to please give us the wisdom to discern what is the right thing to do for our constituents, the citizens of Virginia. And then, Lord, please give us the strength and the humility to do it. All this I pray in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I didn't ever get you one back there.
The members will answer the roll call by indicating their presence on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll.
Mr. Speaker, a quorum is present.
Pursuant to House Rule 3, I've examined and approved the Journal of the House of Delegates for January 25th, 2016. Motions and resolutions under Rule 39 are now in order. Does the clerk have any announcements or communications?
Not at this time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlewoman from Fairfax, Ms. Boysko.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House of Delegates, our governor, Terry McAuliffe, was the first governor to declare a state of emergency, activating all state resources on January 21st. Following the declaration, state agencies immediately identified and positioned resources to speed response and recovery efforts. Multiple state agencies engaged in response efforts, including VDOT, Virginia Department of Health, Virginia State Police, Virginia National Guard, and Virginia Defense Force, and the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. I want to thank the governor for his leadership and all the state employees and first responders involved in the response to the storm. Thank you.
The gentlewoman from Westmoreland, Mr. Anson.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for an introduction.
The gentlewoman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'd like to introduce representatives from Drive Smart Virginia. If you'd rise, please. They're here today along with family members that have lost loved ones. They are here advocating on behalf of distracted driving awareness. Drive Smart Virginia is a nonprofit organization charged with raising awareness and changing behavior in order to improve the safety of the roadways of the Commonwealth. They have endeavored to improve the lives of all Virginians through public information and education initiatives. Mr. Speaker, I would ask the body to welcome the representatives from Drive Smart Virginia to the Capitol today.
Welcome the members from Drive Smart. Hope you enjoy your time in the Capitol, and thank you so much for all that you do on behalf of all Virginians. The gentleman from Augusta, Mr. Landis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise for the purpose of a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, as you all know, this House of Delegates has really taken, as part of our responsibility, very seriously the issues surrounding public education, in particular K through 12. Earlier today, a number of my colleagues and myself had a press conference related to our initiatives that we're bringing forward this session related to K through 12. And we hope to work with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle as we move these issues forward. All of us believe that Virginia students deserve the best possible public education opportunity across the Commonwealth. Our goal is, in the past and also looking forward, to make sure they're successful no matter where they live, no matter what their zip code may be. And as I mentioned, the House has really taken this as a real key responsibility and priority the last few years. And as Secretary Holton and I both like to say, whether you're a member of this side of the aisle or a member of that side of the aisle, everybody supports good public education. And we want that for all Virginians. First, let me talk a little bit about the history of what we've accomplished together. In the last budget cycle, we've invested an additional $861 million for K through 12. And that was with everybody's help. We've also provided our teachers with a 1.5% pay increase, the second pay increase in 3 years. And all of us know that the rubber really meets the road in our classrooms with our teachers and students. Now, we've also had a lot of tough choices, and those of us on the Appropriations Committee can tell you that a lot of times they're not easy to make, but at the same time, with those tough choices related to public education and funding, we've also worked to reform our educational system. And I'm proud of this House and the efforts that we've made to put more money into the classroom. And I think that's the most important thing we need to remember. When you look at funding, classroom funding has actually gone up. And a JLAC report that we received late last year showed that to be true. As a result, related to our reforms, our students are scoring higher on their pre-college entrance exams. Virginia teachers are paid more than the national average, on average. And Education Week ranks Virginia's education system 4th best in the nation, and we should all be proud of that. Currently, Virginia is spending more in K through 12 education than we spent under the last budget adopted under Governor Kane when we were going into the recession. And we've been able to do that without raising taxes. And on this side of the aisle, that's very important. Now, let me talk about our agenda for this year, because that's what we're going to be dealing with. This year's agenda, we're outlining that we talked about today in our press conference, and I'm talking about on the floor today, will basically follow on what we did last year related to teacher pay, reforming our standards of learning, and basically putting our parents and teachers back in charge of education. Now, we want to make smart, targeted investments into our educational system. And I know Chairman Jones and all of us on the Appropriations Committee are working hard to do that. This year, the House of Delegates will continue to invest in public education, enact additional reforms, and make our public education system more efficient, promote greater choice and flexibility for our parents, and encourage access in early childhood education through private partnerships. Now, school choice is an issue we debate on this floor and in the Education Committee. But let's talk about the issues that you're going to hear and see this year. First is charter schools. And we can have and we'll have a debate related to charter schools. But charter schools provide a great option for our families to make decisions for their children's education that they believe is important. New York has 197 charter schools, and Washington, D.C. has 115. Virginia has 9. Delegate Bell is going to be proposing a constitutional amendment that will finally set up a framework and allow us, the General Assembly, to come back and put in place a framework that encourages the creation and development of public charter schools. Delegate LaRock is carrying legislation that will create the Education Savings Account, a new initiative that is up and running in other states. We also are going to look at how the funds for this ESA can be used for tuition, tutoring, private courses, instructional supplies for homeschooling, and online learning, and more. Now let me talk a little bit about early education. There is, I think, a broad agreement that early education is important for student success. Now, to do that, we've got to find a delivery system that will meet that goal. Our challenge is going to be how to find the most cost-effective way to deliver a value on behalf of our citizens related to early childhood education. Let me be clear. Universal pre-K would be very costly for our state and could lead to increased class sizes and limit our ability to invest in public education in the future. And I don't support universal pre-K. But what we do need to focus on is increasing early childhood access, education access, break down the barriers between our public and private providers, and incentivize ways to get more children access to pre-K or early childhood education. Now, we will have several measures to be looking at this issue and to bringing forward and solutions related to early childhood education and that public-private partnership I mentioned. Delegate Greason will be creating a pilot program to test a mixed delivery early childhood education model, and will be providing, I hope, Mr. Chairman, funding in the budget for those pilot projects. Delegate Greason also has a piece of legislation establishing a stakeholder committee to explore how to break down barriers and limit the use of private providers. For those of us on the pre-K joint subcommittee, we found that there are a lot of challenges in getting our public and private sector entities to work together to serve more children. So we're going to look at that. Delegate Massey will look at expanding the eligibility of his successful Education Improvement Scholarship tax credit that will include early childhood providers that can serve more children in more parts of the Commonwealth. Now let me real quickly, Mr. Speaker, before I conclude, talk about some of the innovation reforms that we have. No one has been more committed to education reform over the last several years than this House, and I congratulate each member on their work related to that. We have passed dozens of bills to cut red tape for local school leaders and teachers. We've enacted reforms to ensure that money is spent in the classroom and not lost in the educational bureaucracy. And we've led efforts to reform our standards of learning, which we should all be proud. We are continuing our multi-year effort to make major innovations in public education in the Commonwealth. And we'll have legislation from Delegate LaRock prohibiting Common Core from being implemented in Virginia, and that's on the calendar today. We have a parental notification law that I'm carrying, Mr. Speaker, that you're familiar with, to make sure students are not prematurely exposed to sexually explicit materials, and more importantly, that parents are involved in that process. Our Majority Leader, Delegate Cox, has, and I believe this is on the calendar today too, legislation strengthening Virginia's Guaranteed Assistance Program. Delegate Greason will have legislation that makes sure higher education is represented on our SOL Innovation and Reform Committee, which is very important. And last but not least, Delegate Rush is going to have legislation allowing colleges and universities to offer flat fee degrees, which is a great higher education reform. So, Mr. Speaker and ladies of the House, first let me thank you all for your attention. And I congratulate each member on the work we've done and the work we can do this session to improve our public education, both K through 12 and higher education this year. We want to work across the aisle. We want to work with the administration as we move these efforts forward. And we look forward to, I think, an even more successful public education and higher education session than we've ever seen before. So thank you all very much for your kind attention.
The gentlewoman from Chesterfield, Ms. Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a request.
Gentlelady has the floor.
I would like to ask the members of the House for unanimous consent to introduce a bill after the filing deadline.
Could you tell them what the bill's about?
It's a FOIA bill, and it has to do with
The gentlewoman from Chesterfield requests unanimous consent to
Speaker.
introduce a bill that would basically gut our Freedom of Information law.
Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Charlottesville,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Scott.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for a question?
Gentlewoman yield?
yes, I would, please.
Gentlewoman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I ask the gentlewoman, is this a totally new bill, or has this bill been seen in the General Assembly this year in some other form?
Mr. Speaker, I would respond to this is a new bill.
Brand new.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Chesterfield, Ms. Robinson, asked for unanimous consent to introduce a bill after the deadline for bill introduction. As many as favor that motion will vote aye. Oh, yeah, this will vote. We'll say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no? The motion is agreed to. The gentleman from Franklin, Mr. Poindexter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for an introduction.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the body. The gentlewoman from Bedford, Delegate Byron, and myself today have some special visitors visiting the Capitol and General Assembly building. The leadership of the Smith Mountain Lake Chamber Partnership are with us today, and I'd ask them to stand, please. We have with us the Executive Director, Vicki Gardner, the Chairman of the Board 2016, Lee Willard, and Woody Hogle, the Government Affairs Committee Chair, and the Special Projects Manager, Bob Nokera. We're delighted to have them with us today. I remind the body of a few days ago when this body passed Commending Resolution number 36, commending Smith Mountain Lake for its 50th anniversary. And our guests are over here on the left. For those of you that are not familiar with Smith Mountain Lake, it is a tremendous asset to our area up there, Franklin County, Bedford, and Pittsylvania counties. For example, in Franklin County, about 60% of the revenue comes in from the Smith Mountain Lake area. It's a regional asset into Roanoke, Lynchburg, Martinsville, all around. And indeed, it's a Commonwealth asset and a resource, as I know most of you have been on Smith Mountain Lake before. Why? We have about 550 miles of shoreline, linear shoreline, private sector owned by private individuals to do basically as they choose within some reason. We have 22,000 acres of water surface in the lake. ESPN fishing tournaments. Any water sports you want, you can find them up on Smith Mountain Lake. And we have 12,000 residents and over 50,000 visitors coming into Smith Mountain Lake each year. Wonderful businesses from marine and water-oriented to service businesses, excellent medical care, and water quality provided not just for the locals, but by some previous funding here by this body. We have probably 100 volunteer groups in the lake area on Smith Mountain Lake, all sorts of nonprofits. And we also have government-related quasi-groups such as Smith Mountain Lake Association and the Tri-County Lake Administrators, which was set up by the 3 county governments working to address lake issues. But the real voice of Smith Mountain Lake is the Chamber of Commerce, chiefly through its executive director, who has committed her life and her work ethic and her heart and soul to promoting, protecting, and making the best thing that we can make of Smith Mountain Lake. And coming up this year, I would like to, on their behalf, invite you to any one of a multitude of events that's going to occur throughout the year celebrating the 50th anniversary of Smith Mountain Lake. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I would like to give a very warm welcome to the leadership of the very successful Smith Mountain Lake Chamber Partnership.
Delighted to have the members from the partnership visiting with us today, and thank you for all that you do for the Commonwealth. The gentleman from Alexandria, Ms. Herring.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Chamber, I thank the gentleman from Augusta for his words regarding education. Just like your side of the aisle resounded our call to work on a new Virginia economy, we are pleased that you're resounding our call for education. Members on this side of the aisle have worked tirelessly over the years to help build our public schools and make them stronger. Members on this side of the aisle also have initiatives that they have put forward. We have led on pre-K education, and we don't want to close the door to opportunities for any of Virginia's children. So we look forward to working with you to help improve our education, especially our public education system. And a good start is the $1 billion in new funding proposed by our governor for K-12 education. It was said by the gentleman from Augusta that rubber meets the road in the classroom, and we totally agree, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
The gentleman from Hampton, Ms. Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for an introduction.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, we are joined today by faculty and staff members of Thomas Nelson Community College, along with their president, Mr. John Devers. Thomas Nelson Community College is the fourth largest community college in Virginia. The college has served more than 16,000 members. Thomas Nelson Community College's workforce development program enrolled more than 12,000 individuals, delivered more than 400 targeted skills and workforce courses offered through their workforce training, continuing education, and placed more than 5,000 people in high-quality advanced manufacturing jobs in 70 companies across the Hampton Roads area. In 2015, Thomas Nelson launched an advanced integrated manufacturing program designed to train multi-skilled technicians and technologists needed in increasingly automated and digitally controlled manufacturing environments that will keep the region and the Commonwealth strongly competitive, meeting the immediate needs for its advanced manufacturing workforce. If the faculty and staff, our guests from Thomas Nelson, would please rise, I ask that the House do warmly welcome them.
Pleased to have the representatives from Thomas Nelson with us today. The gentlewoman from Bedford, Ms. Byron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a request.
Gentlewoman has the floor.
I'd like to request that the journal reflect that my seatmate, the delegate from Prince William, is absent due to pressing personal business.
Thank you. Gentleman from Lunenburg, Mr. Wright.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a request.
Gentleman may state it.
Mr. Speaker, I request that the journal reflect that the gentleman from Virginia Beach is away on pressing personal business.
Journal will so reflect. The gentleman from Williamsburg, Mr. Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, Governor McAuliffe and the leaders of the City of Newport News announced that PrintPack, one of the largest flexible packaging converters in the United States, will invest $25.7 million to expand its operation in Oakland Industrial Park in the city. Virginia successfully competed against the state of Missouri for the project, landing it that will create 50 new jobs. Founded in 1956 and headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, PrintPak is a privately held manufacturer of flexible and specialty rigid packaging, employing 4,000 associates worldwide. The company operates 25 manufacturing facilities in the United States, Mexico, and China. Mr. Speaker, when thanking the governor and the Virginia Economic Development Partnership and the leaders of Newport News this morning, Jim Stevenson, the director of operations, said PrintPak pioneered the barrier rigid container business in Virginia in 1984, and we've been growing here ever since. After considering other locations for our expansion, we decided to expand in Virginia largely because of our well-established, capable workforce provides us with a solid base of expertise to build upon. Additionally, strong relationships with and support from our local government made expansion in Virginia a solid decision. Mr. Speaker, economic development professionals, some of whom are with us from Thomas Nelson today, are enthusiastically supportive as we go around the country and the nation to draw and attract businesses to Virginia. But they also remind us of the critical importance of supporting those successful businesses here in the Commonwealth and helping them grow. The Virginia Economic Development Partnership worked with the city to land this deal in Virginia. The governor approved a $150,000 grant from the Commonwealth Opportunity Fund and $200,000 performance-based grant from the Virginia Investment Partnership Program, an incentive available to existing Virginia companies. The company is also eligible to receive state benefits from the Virginia Enterprise Zone Program administered by the Housing and Community Development Group. Funding and services to support the company's employee training activities can also be provided through the Virginia Jobs Investment Program. So, Mr. Speaker, many statewide efforts combined with a great effort and in collaboration with our local government gives us the opportunity to continue to support and to welcome PrintPak to continue to expand and grow in Newport News. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Tazewell, Mr. Moorfield.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
You may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I've been serving as a member of this body for the past 7 years. And I can say without question that this assembly is made up of men and women on both sides of the aisle who care deeply for the people they represent. Many of you make every effort to not only address but provide solutions to the many challenges we are confronted with. As you all know, the economy in Southwest Virginia has suffered tremendous loss, especially within the coal fields. With thousands of jobs already lost and a declining population, we must make every effort to support diversifying the economy and protect what little economic activity that remains within the coal fields. A few weeks ago, I was standing in a line of a grocery store waiting to pay for my groceries. And directly in front of me was a young lady with two beautiful little girls. The cashier rang her items up. She pulled her credit card out to pay for her groceries. She swiped her credit card. Her credit card was declined. She swiped the credit card again, and it was declined. She got another credit card out of her purse. She swiped the card, and it was declined as well. She looked at me, and then she looked at the cashier, and she started to cry. She literally broke down into tears. She told the cashier that she was going to call her husband. She picked her phone out of her purse. She tried calling her husband, but she couldn't reach him. She told the cashier that she had to go. Several people in the line offered to pay for her groceries, but she refused and said that she could not possibly accept. As the lady was walking out, she told me that her husband was a coal miner who was recently laid off and was desperately seeking employment. He was a welder and he worked as an electrician before he'd worked in the coal industry, a very skilled individual. But due to so many jobs being dependent on coal and natural gas, he has been unable to find work, even with the skills that he has acquired. He and his wife do not want to resort to welfare. They want to work. And what I experience this woman is going through is something that is happening more and more every day. Now, I'll be one of the first to admit that our region has done a terrible job over the past several years diversifying the economy. But that doesn't mean that we can't work together to make a significant difference. As far as coal is concerned, we all understand that the term non-renewable means, and we all want to be good stewards of the environment, but we cannot sacrifice our livelihoods to replace one industry with another overnight. Yes, we need to seek out alternative forms of energy because fossil fuels will not last forever. But instead, we should focus on research and development for use years to come, because mandating such technologies and environmental policies now is greatly impacting our lives, with the middle class and the poor footing the bill through higher utility costs and food costs. Now, as elected representatives, we're pulled in several directions, often to the extreme right or to the extreme left. And this has certainly become more of an issue today than in the past. As a millennial, I feel that I have more in common with our founding fathers than most would think. And that's because we truly understand the meaning of compromise. Most of us are not so much concerned with party politics as we are with reaching a reasonable compromise to provide a better life for all of society. Not compromising one's values, but obtaining a reasonable solution to the problems we are confronted with every day. I stand before you today, and I respectfully ask this body and all of those in adopting policy that affects not only Southwest Virginia, but for the future of the Commonwealth and the future of this great nation, to please remember that compromise is not bad. It's what we were elected to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for several motions.
Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, on page 14 of the calendar, could HB 568 be moved to the regular calendar?
Without objection, House Bill 568 to the regular calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Second motion on page 21 of the calendar. Could HJ 75, that's my resolution, be moved to the regular calendar for purposes of a technical typographical correction?
Without objection, House Joint Resolution 75 to the regular calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the final motion, HB 86, which I spoke with you about yesterday and we've spoken to the clerk about, has been on the calendar now for I think a week, and it got lost in the shuffle. It's a commending resolution involving, it's House Resolution 86, HR 86. It's been lost in the shuffle because of the snowstorm, and it involves a commending resolution for a local Baptist minister in my community involving his anniversary with the church. And I would request that that be brought up out of order so we could pass it and get it to him in time for the anniversary.
The clerk will report a resolution.
House Resolution number 86, commending the Reverend Dr. Lehman D. Bates II.
Move that the resolution be passed.
Those in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Resolution is agreed to. The gentleman from Chesapeake, Mr. Leftwich.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for introduction.
Gentleman has the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, today I'd like to introduce you to two pillars of my community. We're in the gallery this afternoon. Ray Connor, who is our Commissioner of Revenue. He's been Commissioner of Revenue for as long as I can remember, and is a walking encyclopedia of political stats and information. Is always helpful to, always there to help give a helping hand to those running for office. And the other is Councilman Richard West, who actually taught in the high school I graduated from, and he's serves on City Council now. So I asked the House to give them a warm welcome. Thank you.
The clerk will report a resolution.
House Joint Resolution Number 210, election of a Supreme Court of Virginia Justice, and the resolution has been distributed.
The gentleman from Richmond City, Mr. Lupasi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the adoption of the resolution.
Gentleman Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
I'll yield.
Gentleman yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The gentleman did come and talk to me, so that's not really the issue, and I don't really have an issue with this resolution. But since people are on pins and needles about this justice, who's going to be appointed justice to the Supreme Court, could you please just tell the body this has nothing to do with anything but to keep the process going, and could you please explain to this body what's going to happen next?
It's not on my script, but yes, sir. Yes. No. Mr. Speaker, I would tell the gentleman that we have to do this in order to keep the process moving to get a justice so we can vote on it. So that's what we're doing.
Short follow-up question for the gentleman. Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yield? Gentleman
Yes,
yield.
sir, I yield.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I asked the gentleman, is it the process so far as you understand that we're probably interviewing candidates for this position tomorrow in courts? Is that your understanding? And that there may be several interviews that go on?
I'd answer the gentleman that that's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the resolution be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, no 0.
Ayes 98, no 0. The resolution is agreed to. Gentleman from Richmond City, Mr. Lupasi, will advise the Senate of the resolution. Are there further motions or resolutions under Rule 39? If not, the clerk will call the calendar. The gentleman from Richmond City clerk had a good idea. Why don't you wait till we vote on the block so we don't have to do them all over again? And then you can go. Clerk will call the calendar.
Calendar for the Virginia House of Delegates for Tuesday, January 26, 2016. Page 1 of the printed calendar, House Bills on third reading. House Bills third reading uncontested calendar. House Bill 114, page 2. House Bills 123, 124, 125. Page 3 of the printed calendar, House Bill 208, 440, 476. Page 4 of the printed calendar, House Bill 514, House Bill 691, House Bill 699, and House Bill 734.
Shall the bills pass? Gentleman from Charlottesville. The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, no 0.
Ayes 98, no 0. The bills are passed.
Continuing with today's calendar, House Bills on third reading, regular calendar. House Bills on third reading, regular calendar. House Bill 20, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to the excise tax on peanuts.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Aye. Ayes 94, noes 4.
Ayes 94, noes 4. The bill is passed.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I heard it. House Bill 115, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to diversion of commodity fund unexpended balances.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 96, noes 0.
Ayes 96, no 0. The bill is passed.
Mr. Speaker, continuing with the calendar, printed calendar, page 6, House Bills on second reading, uncontested calendar. Second reading, uncontested calendar. House Bill 16, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to health insurance, payment for services by dentists and oral surgeons. Report for the Committee on Commerce and Labor with amendments.
The gentleman from Powhatan, Mr. Ware.
Mr. Speaker, I move the amendment.
The question is on adoption of the committee amendment. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment's agreed to. The gentleman from Powhatan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the adoption of those amendments, this bill is a continuation of one that we passed in here in 2010. And essentially what we said at that time is that dental insurance companies cannot be compelled, dental offices cannot be compelled by insurance companies to charge rates for non-covered services at a rate that is not part of their contract. What was happening at that time is that you had insurance companies putting contracts in front of dentists that set fees that dentists could charge only for covered procedures. They were putting them on procedures that were not covered by their policy. Since that time, there have been examples of dental plans covering only a small percentage of specific procedures, effectively skirting this law and then claiming that it's covered. The good news is that the practice is not being widely implemented yet, but it's appropriate to close the loophole before it goes any further. This also follows action we took last year regarding vision care. I ask that the House pass the bill and move it on to its third reading.
House Bill 34, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to appointments for safety inspections. Report for the Committee on Transportation.
The gentleman from Henrico, Mr. Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 34 corrects an issue brought to me by a constituent where I didn't realize auto repair shops actually only under very limited circumstances were allowed to offer appointments to get a state inspection. I don't think the government really needs to be telling a business owner how to run their appointment book. So this really just provides an option for the business owner to take appointments if he wishes. That's all the bill does. I hope the bill will be engrossed and passed on to its third reading.
Turning to page 7 of the printed calendar, House Bill 41, a bill to designate portions of Virginia Route 72, Virginia Route 619, and U.S. Route 58 alternate in the counties of Scott and Wise and the city of Norton, the Thomas Jefferson Scenic Byway Loop. Report for the Committee on Transportation.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, House Bill 41 designates parts of roads as the Thomas Jefferson Scenic Byway Loop. These are located in the Jefferson National Forest. Hope it would be the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Thank you.
House Bill 202, a bill to amend and reenact various sections of the code relating to anatomical gift, human remains detection dog training. Report for the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions with a substitute.
The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Knight.
Mr. Speaker, I move the substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Substitute agreed to. The gentleman from Virginia Beach.
Mr. Speaker, House Bill 202 directs the Virginia Department of Health to convene a work group of key stakeholders to explore the mechanisms for using human remains donated as anatomical gifts for purposes of training dogs to find human remains during search and rescue operations. Mr. Speaker, I move the House engross the bill and pass to its third reading.
House Bill 213, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to exceptions to motor vehicle inspection requirement. Report from the Committee on Transportation.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Lemunyan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 213 pertains to situations in which a motorist has an expired inspection sticker. Current law provides, for example, the opportunity to drive your car from your house to the inspection station and not get a ticket. The current law doesn't speak to the issue of once your car is parked at the inspection station waiting to get inspected or repaired. And we actually had an enterprising police officer in Fairfax County who went to 3 inspection stations in Chantilly and handed out tickets to parked cars waiting to get inspected. So this bill will make sure that that doesn't happen again. I hope it'll be the pleasure of the body to engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Continuing with the calendar, House Bill 239, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to division of fees among physicians. Report from the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions.
The gentleman from Henrico, Mr. O'Bannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is a work product of the Health Law section of the Bar Association. It is prohibition for fee splitting of physicians. Virginia's had this on its books since '56. This just updates the language and supported by the Medical Society. I hope we'll engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
House Bill 245, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to the Keeper of the Rolls of the Commonwealth, authority to correct errors in legislation. Report from the Committee on Rules.
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HB 245 authorizes the Keeper of the Rolls, our clerk, to correct typographical errors in resolutions. Currently, they can always do that for bills, so it just expands greatly their authority. I hope it will be the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
House Bill 307, a bill to amend and reenact several sections of the code relating to insurance notices. Report for the Committee on Commerce and Labor.
The gentleman from Bedford, Ms. Byron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 307 comes at the request of the State Corporation Commission Bureau of Insurance. The bill amends various sections of the code regarding notices received by applicants and policyholders and property insurance policies, clarifying outdated or not specific terminology that is either eliminated or revised and goes into effect after January 1, 2017. I hope it would be the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Page 9 of the printed calendar, House Bill 310, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to mobile dental clinics, exemption from registration requirements. Report for the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions with a substitute.
Gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, I move adoption of the committee substitute.
The questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 310 simply takes away the registration requirement for a mobile dental clinic in those circumstances where they're going into nursing homes and other assisted living facilities, where the patients are not ambulatory, where that they're operating as part of a free clinic network, or other charity provisions whereby these facilities are going into remote, underserved areas and providing critical dental services. I'll be the pleasure of the body to pass the bill. Engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
House Bill 311, a bill to require the Secretary of Health and Human Resources to undertake efforts to establish collaborative agreements with other states to allow emergency medical services providers to provide emergency medical services across state lines. Emergency.
Gentleman, Carolina.
Health, Welfare, and Institutions.
Mr. Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, ladies of the House, if you represent an area of the state that borders on one of our neighbor states, then you have the circumstance where Virginia EMS providers may be called into those neighbor states to provide emergency assistance, and likewise, EMS providers from our border states may be called in the Commonwealth to assist. Right now, it's very questionable, given that we don't give reciprocity automatically in EMS licensure, as to whether those individuals are covered by the protections of our Good Samaritan law and other legal protections that exist for our providers in our own state. This will require the Secretary of Health and Human Resources to work with his counterpart in our neighboring states to ensure that there'll be a collaborative agreement so that an individual in Bluefield, Virginia, responding into the West Virginia area will be provided the same protections, and likewise, a West Virginia provider coming onto our side of the line won't fear any prosecution under Virginia law for doing what they're trained to do. I hope you have the pleasure of the body to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
House Bill 312, a bill to require the Department of Health to work with stakeholders to increase sharing of electronic health records. Emergency. Report of the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions with a substitute.
The gentleman from Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I move the adoption of the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, as we've entered the new technology era of electronic records exchange, there exists a problem between many of our medical care providers in so much that your X-ray and other diagnostic test procedures that are held by one medical facility may not be able to be shared with another facility in a nearby jurisdiction or elsewhere in the state. The premise behind electronic record exchange was that all of your medical records should be available wherever you may need medical care. Largely, this is a problem between vendors having systems that won't communicate with other systems, but there are also some more complex issues than that. This will simply have the Secretary of Health and Human Resources convene a group of stakeholders to try and find a means whereby our citizens can get their records wherever they need them, whenever they need them. Currently, the practice sometimes means the patients, having had a diagnostic procedure at another facility a couple weeks previously, they go in under emergency circumstances. The new facility can't access those old records. They order a new CAT scan. Insurance then denies it because you just had one 2 weeks ago, and the patient is stuck with a bill. It'll be the pleasure of the body to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Gentleman, Prince William, Mr. Marshall.
Would the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman,
I yield.
Gentleman yield.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, would the gentleman inform the members what efforts will be taken to deal with questions of security of these health records that might be shifted from one provider to another?
Ms. Speaker, I'd respond to the gentleman that all of those questions in my mind are covered by federal HIPAA requirements that stipulate it can't be shared with an unauthorized provider. The circumstance that exists is I'm aware of a specific case in my area where an individual had been a patient at one hospital in the area. In an emergency transport case, they were transported to a different hospital. That hospital, in diagnosing the problems, wanted to see the baseline from 2 weeks previous when a CAT scan had been done, but because the two diagnostic vendor systems couldn't communicate with each other, the radiologist in the second facility couldn't see the CAT scans that had been done 2 weeks previously. This does not expand in any way the scope of who would be entitled to see these records.
Further question, Mr. Speaker?
Will the gentleman yield? Gentleman yields.
Let me rephrase this. My concern is not just for that situation, but for the security of the records from hackers, somebody who would never be intended to have received this. Is that going to be discussed to provide security? Because if you get person's genetic information out, this may compromise their ability to get insurance in the future.
Mr. Speaker, I'd only respond to the gentleman that that's not a part of what is embodied in the study and the issues to be resolved, because that's a system endemic to all electronic communication medium and wouldn't be affected in any way, shape, or form that I can see. That if a hacker can get in to the records through one facility, they can do it through another and access any of us. I think that's part of the larger system and not a part of this resolution or this Section 1 bill.
Thank you.
Turning to page 10 of the calendar, House Bill 314, a bill to amend and reenact two sections of the Code of Virginia relating to administration of drugs by certain school employees. Report for the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions with a substitute.
The gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Rock.
Mr. Speaker, I move the adoption of the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, a couple years back we passed legislation that allowed within our public school system the school nurse and other school personnel properly trained to administer certain drugs in emergency circumstances, such as insulin, epinephrine, things of that nature. All House Bill 314 does is extend those same protections and provisions to our private school community so that those students can take advantage of the same level of medical training of personnel within those school divisions to administer those drugs in an emergency case. Hope it the pleasure of the body to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
House Bill 324, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to insurance rates decreases. Report from the Committee on Commerce and Labor with a substitute.
Gentleman Scott, Mr. Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I would move that we adopt the committee substitute.
The questions on adoption of the committee substitutes, may as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, those substitutes agreed to. The gentleman from Scott.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 324 codifies a long-standing industry practice that the Bureau of Insurance discontinued due to recent interpretation. And what this bill allows is transitional renewal rates or transitional rates. It means that if it goes up, the Bureau of Insurance can work that in over payments over time, or if it goes down, it could, transitional renewal rate would work that way. So for many years, the Bureau of Insurance permitted these transitional rates for both rate increases and rate decreases, and there was a recent interpretation, and that's why the bill was brought. So I hope that you would support House Bill 324, and I would ask that it be engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Thank you.
House Bill 329, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to flashing amber lights on public transit buses. Report for the Committee on Transportation.
The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Villanueva.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 329 adds to the list publicly owned or operated transit buses to the list of vehicles that could use amber lights. This list currently includes towing vehicles, trash collection vehicles, and emergency snow removal vehicles. I hope it would be the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass this to its third reading.
Thank you.
Turning to page 11 of the printed calendar, House Bill 393, a bill to amend and reenact various sections of the Code of Virginia relating to insurance agencies, designated licensed producers. Report for the Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Gentleman from Powhatan, Mr. Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 393 is an update to the code requested by the State Corporation Commission in the case of designated licensed producers that insurance agencies employ. It sets deadlines for filling vacancies in this role and reporting those who are filled, newly selected producers, reporting those to the State Corporation Commission. I would ask the House to engross the bill and pass it along to its third reading.
Okay.
House Bill 435, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to licensure of adult daycare centers, programs of all-inclusive care for the elderly programs exempt. Report from the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions.
The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Talley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The program for all-inclusive care for the elderly is highly regulated by both the federal and state agencies. House Bill 435 removes the redundant requirement for adult daycare center licensure. Mr. Speaker, I move the bill be engrossed and move to its third reading.
Thank you.
House Bill 477, a bill to authorize issuance of bonds for certain Veterans Care Center projects. Report from the Committee on Appropriations.
Gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HB 477 provides $29.3 million in Virginia Public Building Authority bonds for a Veterans Care Center. Let me just remind everybody where we're at with that. Currently, we have two, one in Salem and one at Cedar Barfoot, which is right across from McGuire's in Richmond. We've been on the waiting list since 2006, as I recall, for one in Hampton Roads and around 2011 timeframe for Northern Virginia. Last year, in working with Admiral Harvey, we came up with a solution, hopefully. A state-only 120-bed facility. We had enough money last year, around $66 million, to build one and plan one. What this would allow us to do would be to build the second one. So hopefully in the next few years, 3 to 5 years, we'd have 2 more Veterans Care Centers up and running. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I hope it would be the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Okay.
House Bill 498, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to TPA-certified optometrist, prescription of certain Schedule II controlled substances. Report for the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions with an amendment.
The gentleman from Middlesex, Mr. Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move adoption of the committee amendment.
The questions on adoption of the committee amendment. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The committee amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from Middlesex.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 498 provides that a TPA certified optometrist who is authorized to prescribe controlled substance may continue their current practice of prescribing Schedule II controlled substances consisting of hydrocodone in combination with acetaminophen. I hope it will be the pleasure of the body to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
House Bill 504, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to renewal of certification as a nurse aide. Report from the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions.
Gentleman from Lynchburg, Mr. Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, House Bill 504 is basically a cleanup bill. When fees for all professions under the Board of Nursing were increased in 2011, it was decided that it would be easier for certified nursing aides to pay a smaller fee each year rather than a larger fee biennially. The Board of Nursing changed the regulations from a biennial renewal to an annual renewal. This bill simply makes the same change in the code. Mr. Speaker, I hope it's the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading. Thank you.
House Bill 507, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to exceptions to motor vehicle inspection requirement. Report from the Committee on Transportation with a substitute.
The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Villanueva.
Mr. Speaker, I move the substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Virginia Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 507 removes burdensome regulations for auto dealers purchasing motor vehicles from auctions to take their vehicles directly to an official safety inspection station rather than having to truck it to their place of business and truck it back to the inspection station. I hope it's a pleasure to the House to engross the bill and pass this to its third reading.
House Bill 527, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to registration of non-resident medical equipment suppliers. Report from the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions. And Mr. Speaker, there's a technical floor amendment.
The gentleman from Middlesex, Mr. Hodges.
Move adoption of the technical floor amendment, Mr. Speaker.
The questions on adoption of the technical floor amendment. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The technical floor amendment is agreed to.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 527 creates a new licensing category for non-resident medical equipment suppliers and formalizes the board's existing process of issuing voluntary permits to non-resident medical equipment suppliers and hold out-of-state medical equipment supplier facilities to a similar licensure oversight as in-state medical equipment supplier facilities. I hope it will be the pleasure of the body to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
House Bill 528, a bill to amend and reenact various sections of the Code of Virginia, repeal others, all relating to manufacture and distribution of prescription drugs in the Commonwealth. Report for the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions.
The gentleman from Middlesex, Mr. Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 528 conforms Virginia law to the Federal Drug Quality and Security Act. The bill requires wholesaler distributors and pharmacies to comply with federal track and trace requirements, creates a new licensing category for in-state third-party logistics providers and non-resident manufacturers. It also clarifies the use of bulk drug substances in compounding. I hope it will be the pleasure of the body to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Thank you.
House Bill 564, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to optometrists, continuing education requirements. Report from the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions with amendments.
The gentlewoman from Chesterfield, Ms. Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, I move the adoption of the committee amendments.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendments. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to. The gentlewoman from Chesterfield.
House Bill 564 increases the continuing education requirements for optometrists from 16 to 20 hours. It also will allow optometrists to carry over up to 10 hours to the next year once they have exceeded 20 hours of CE. I ask the bill be engrossed and passed on to its third reading.
Turn to page 14 of the printed calendar. House Bill 566, a bill to amend and reenact various sections of the code relating to licensed on-site soil evaluators. Terminology. Report for the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions.
The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Knight.
Mr. Speaker, House Bill 566 changes the term authorized to licensed in reference to soil evaluators. The term authorized is not a standard industry term. Mr. Speaker, I move the House engross the bill and pass to its third reading.
House Bill 568 has been moved to the regular calendar. Accordingly, House Bill 580, a bill to amend and reenact two sections of the Code of Virginia relating to nurses, definitions. Report for the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions with a substitute.
Gentlewoman from Chesterfield, Ms. Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, I move the adoption of the substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. Gentleman from Chesterfield.
This bill will help delineate which advanced practice registered nurses are defined as nurse practitioners Under the boards of nursing and medicine, the bill clarifies that a practice agreement is not required for certified registered nurse anesthetists, since they are the only category of nurse practitioners that practice under the supervision of a physician. I ask the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 583, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to certification of peer providers. Reported from Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions.
The gentleman from Giles, Mr. Yost.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 583 authorizes the Commissioner of the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services to certify individuals as peer providers in accordance with regulations adopted by their board. I hope it will be the pleasure of the body to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Continuing with the calendar, House Bill 646, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services related to substance abuse. Report on the state plan for substance abuse providers. Report for the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions.
The gentleman from Petersburg, Ms. Aird.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this legislation, House Bill 646, eliminates the requirement for the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services to file a biennial report on its substance abuse-related activities. The biennial report is a duplicative report because the Appropriations Act already requires the department to provide an annual report on its activities. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that the House engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Rock.
Will the gentlelady yield for purposes of a question?
Will the gentlewoman yield?
Mr. Speaker, I yield.
Gentlewoman yields.
Ms. Speaker, I begin by apologizing to the gentlelady by not raising this question when it came before the full committee. However, given that this is only duplicative because the Budget Act requires reporting on these provisions and others, and given that the Budget Act only exists for a 2-year time frame, would the gentlelady not suggest that we may be doing some harm by not putting this in code section where it will stand in perpetuity absent an action such as we are proposing to undertake this afternoon through this legislation measure, taking out of the code the language that all the citizens can see and have the assurance that our department is going to report on what they're doing based on what we have given them the responsibility to oversee. Would the gentlelady comment on that, please?
Mr. Speaker, I would respond to the kind gentleman by saying that no, we would not be doing harm by removing this duplicative report. Thank you.
Ms. Speaker, will the gentlelady yield for additional?
Will the gentlewoman yield?
I yield.
Gentlewoman yields.
What makes her think I'm kind?
Mr. Speaker, I can take that back if he'd like.
The gentleman from Richmond City, Ms. McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentlelady yield for a question?
Gentlewoman yield.
I yield.
Gentlewoman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentlewoman, is she aware how long this report has been duplicative in both the Appropriations Act and in the code?
Mr. Speaker, I would respond by saying that this measure, this bill, is a cost savings measure, and I believe that the gentlewoman from Richmond would agree that any measure that is saving the taxpayers' dollars should be supported. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentlewoman yield for another question?
Gentlewoman
I yield.
Gentlewoman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentlewoman, did she take a look at all of the other reports that are required to the General Assembly in both the code and in the appropriations that no one ever reads?
Mr. Speaker, I would respond in saying that I plan to do so.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentlewoman yield for another question?
I yield.
Gentlewoman yields. You don't have to.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentlewoman if she would be ready to commit today that she will continue these cost-saving measures by reviewing every report that is sent to the General Assembly and introducing legislation to remove any that are duplicative or never read by anyone in the General Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I would respond by saying that I would make that pledge if the gentlewoman would join me in that.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that this go to the regular calendar so that I can think about it.
Thank you, Mr.
Without
Speaker.
objection to the regular calendar.
House Bill 657, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to the prescription monitoring program, disclosure of information. Report from the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions with an amendment.
Gentleman from Henrico, Mr. O'Bannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess the lesson we just learned is you better quit when you're behind. I request that the House adopt the amendment offered by the committee.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendment? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The committee amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from Henrico.
Thank you, sir. And as your calendar reflects, Delegate Herring had something very similar to this. This is a piece of where we're trying to get at the fact that we now lose more Virginia citizens from drug deaths, from overdoses, than we do from car wrecks. And so we serve on a commission. I think Delegate Hodges was on it. What this basically does is directs the health professions folks, the pharmacists and the medical people, to get together and use the prescription monitoring program to identify people at risk. I hope we will engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
House Bill 747, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to ownership of service facilities. Report for the Committee on Transportation.
The gentleman from Loudoun, Mr. Greason.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 747, if I could bring your attention to the code. As most of you know, it's unlawful for any motor vehicle manufacturer, factory branch, distributor branch to own, operate, or control any motor vehicle warranty or service facility. That is current code. Certain circumstances, when you're having a manufacturer of a very complex vehicle like a fuel truck or a school bus parts, those manufacturing steps are actually discrete and independent steps and sometimes require warranty and servicing from different entities. This bill is designed to specifically carve out the manufacturers of engines for trucks having gross weights of more than 7,500 pounds. It's a very narrowly drawn exception to the current code, and I would ask that the bill be engrossed and passed on to its third reading.
Thank you. And Mr. Speaker, House Bill 1063, a bill to authorize the issuance of bonds in an amount up to $14,387,000 plus financing costs pursuant to Article 10, Section 9C of the Constitution of Virginia for paying costs of acquiring, constructing, and equipping revenue-producing capital projects at institutions of higher education of the Commonwealth. Emergency. Report to the Committee on Appropriations.
The gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Jones.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, I would say the clerk did an excellent job in explaining what this bill does. It is for 3 projects on the campuses of Norfolk State, Richard Bland College, and the College of William & Mary. We do these bills every year. They're funded by the revenues that are generated from these projects. So I'd ask that we engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Shall the bills be engrossed and passed to third reading? So, any in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bills are engrossed and passed to their third reading.
Continuing with today's calendar, printed version, page 17, House Bills on second reading, regular calendar. House Bill second reading, regular calendar. House Bill 2, a bill to require the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality to receive approval from the General Assembly for a state plan to regulate carbon dioxide emissions from existing stationary sources prior to submitting the state plan to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for approval. Report for the Committee on Commerce and Labor.
The gentleman from Washington, Mr. O'Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. House Bill 2 is a bill that, as was said by the clerk, requires General Assembly approval of any state plan that's submitted under the Clean Power Plan. It says simply that the DEQ and State Corporation Commission must work together to take into account several different factors. If you're looking at the numbered version of the bill, it's lines 26 through 65. Multiple factors there, including reliability, stranded costs, jobs and job loss, as well as any increased costs to ratepayers, regardless of whether that be consumers or whether it be businesses. And this is a big decision that we're acting on here. And the EPA, when they put out the rules, said that They understand that state legislatures may weigh in on these decisions, that there is going to be a regulatory process, and thus they have given us the time to be able to do that. And I think that the DEQ is already in the middle of either receiving or asking for an extension. And there are other opportunities after that for us to be able to get this particular piece of the puzzle right. I think we all know that, that this particular plan is going to cause utility rates to go up exponentially. As a matter of fact, that's in fact part of the plan. And again, it doesn't matter if it's residential, retail, manufacturing, whatever the case may be. When it's all said and done, those rates are going up, and then the way basic economics work is that those costs get passed along into increased costs of goods and services down the road. And, and I think that in the not too distant future, we all get phone calls about a lot of different issues. We're going to be getting a lot of phone calls about this particular issue. And so each and every one of us, all 100, will get an opportunity to point to something that we did or did not do that affects that situation and hits every single business and individual ratepayer in the pocketbook. And as you've heard before, you've heard today, you've heard many other times in the past, that our region has been particularly hard hit with a lot of devastating economic effects. And so I think that taking the factors that you see on lines 26 through 65 into account really is the least that we can do so that we can honestly look people in the eye who are being hit the hardest by this and tell them that we have done our dead level best to try to protect them during these rough economic times. So, Mr. Speaker, I move that we engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill at the appropriate time.
The gentleman from Arlington, Mr. Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking of the bill, according to NOAA and NASA, 2015 was the hottest year in recorded history. The average global temperature in 2015 was 1.62 degrees over the 20th century average, breaking the annual global record by the largest margin in the entire scientific record. Temperature spikes like this lead to extreme and more intense weather events, droughts, wildfires, and rising sea levels. Hampton Roads, home to the most vital military assets, is rated second only to New Orleans in the most vulnerable area for sea level rise in the nation. Norfolk, which has seen sea level rise significantly over the last 80 years, regularly has parts of the city blocked off due to flooding, and insurance companies are starting to refuse to insure properties within 2 miles of the coastline. According to a 2013 report from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, seas are expected to rise another 1.5 feet within the next 20 to 50 years. We know that inaction is a non-starter. The world's leading scientists from NASA to the National Academy of Sciences, the Royal Academy of Science, have said inaction on climate change will ensure worsening extreme weather events, threaten food supplies, and increase public health risks. And we know that the delegate from Tazewell is correct. We know that we need to compromise always, or try to strive for compromise. And we also know that we need to be taking care of communities in the cold field. But we also know that special interests will make doomsday claims about killing jobs and hurting the economy. They've made those claims every time America sets clear rules and better standards for our air and our water and our children's health. And every time they've been wrong. In 1990, when Congress took steps to stop acid rain, those special interests claimed electricity bills would rise, the lights would go out, and businesses around the country would suffer. When we passed the Clean Air Act to combat smog, they said new pollution standards would decimate the auto industry. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now. Whether it's the economic repercussions of sea level rise on our coastline, the health consequences of breathing polluted air, or the threat of more extreme weather conditions, climate change is having an impact on our day-to-day lives. Thankfully, EPA's Clean Power Plan creates an opportunity for Virginia to reduce its carbon pollution, mitigate the consequences of climate change, and grow our economy through investments in clean energy and energy efficiency. Combined with the historic U.S.-China agreement on climate change and COP21 in Paris, EPA's Clean Power Plan is a significant step forward. Developed with the input of thousands of stakeholders, the CPP provides us with the flexibility and autonomy we need to develop a true Virginia plan that promotes job creation and helps build economic opportunity. With the right policies in place, Virginia has the potential to create thousands of jobs and tens of millions in economic development. Jobs that currently go to North Carolina, which has more than 30 times as much solar as we do, to West Virginia, whose wind energy has far outpaced ours, and Maryland, whose energy efficiency industry is thriving. In a nutshell, the CPP provides a new standard to reduce carbon pollution from power plants, the largest contributor to U.S. emissions, and is a key component of America's efforts to address climate change. Each state has a unique power generation portfolio, and the CPP has set different emission goals for each. Virginia has one of the more moderate mass or rate-based state targets, and we're well positioned to meet or even exceed our goal. And it's important to note that no current coal-fired power plants will be closed as a consequence of these new EPA regs. The CPP also gives us an opportunity to raise hundreds of millions of dollars by auctioning off carbon emission permits. This money could in turn be used for things like helping towns deal with increased coastal flooding, developing clean energy, and investing in economically distressed coal communities. A strong state plan can reduce pollution while spurring renewable energy development, increasing energy efficiency, and reducing the typical Virginia residents' electricity bills, creating new revenue streams through carbon trading, and creating new, good-paying jobs. A strong plan would reduce the state's carbon pollution, helping reduce the threats of recurrent flooding for Virginia's coastal communities and extreme weather damage for other parts of the state. The rule provides two primary options for us: a state-specific compliance plan developed by Virginia, or, if we don't submit a plan, a generic federal implementation plan imposed on us by the EPA. DEQ is currently facilitating a robust and comprehensive stakeholder group to develop a Virginia-specific state implementation plan. Also, DEQ is already considering local economic concerns, utility rates, and grid reliability as it develops the Virginia plan. However, we run a significant risk of forcing the EPA to implement its own federal plan on us if we delay finalizing our Virginia-specific plan. The initial deadline, as my friend from Washington stated, is September for the draft plan. HB 2 would put a roadblock and require a majority in both chambers to approve any Virginia-specific compliance plan prior to DEQ submitting it to EPA. Why is this delay wrong? One, the bill's analysis and reporting requirements are redundant and duplicative of actions already being taken by DEQ and SEC as laid out in Senator Wagner's bill, SB 1349 from last year. Two, the bill sets a pretty dangerous precedent where the General Assembly would be acting as a regulatory body rather than our proper role as a lawmaking body. And finally, and most importantly, this bill would delay DEQ's ability to formulate a compliance plan that works for Virginia and increases the risk that the EPA would impose its own federal compliance plan on us. HB 2 infringes upon the governor's authority to develop a state plan with agencies that are experts in protecting health and the environment, one that fits the unique needs of Virginia, and one that works best for our economy and our communities. Listen, the protection and preservation of Virginia's environment is included in Virginia's Constitution, and this should not be a partisan issue. But if we have a chance to create more jobs, increase economic development, lower monthly power bills, improve public health, especially for kids and vulnerable populations, and create a cleaner and healthier environment for future generations, why shouldn't we act immediately? The Virginia General Assembly should be working with the governor to develop the best plan possible for Virginia's environment, economy, and energy future, not fighting him and putting up unnecessary counterproductive barriers to compliance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Salem, Mr. Habib.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, at the outset, let me be clear. You can believe everything you just heard from the gentleman from Arlington as it relates to the environment, climate change, and everything else, and you should still support this bill. Let's talk about what this bill really is. This bill is not about preventing implementation of the Clean Power Plan. This is not about just trying to override the EPA. It's not about being anti-Obama. It's not about any of those things. The question is, who should set the energy policy for the Commonwealth of Virginia? It's that simple. Should it be the DC bureaucrats who passed the Clean Power Plan, implemented by Richmond bureaucrats working in the executive branch, or should the legislative branch oversee Virginia's energy policy? None of the rest of it matters. You can believe in climate change, not believe in climate change, love Obama, not love Obama. It doesn't matter. The question is, should this body continue to be the policy-making body in Virginia, or should we abdicate that responsibility to the governor? And if you believe that we're too weak and incapable to do our job to set the policy for Virginia, then vote against the bill. Let the governor do your job for you. But if you want to do the job that you were elected to come here and do, stand up, fight for the prerogative of this body, pull control of the Virginia energy policy back into this body where it has always been and should remain, vote for the bill, and let's come up with a Virginia plan drafted by Virginia legislators, elected by Virginia citizens to come here and do our job. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Sullivan.
Speaking to the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'm always a little puzzled when I hear comments calling the Clean Power Plan a job killer. That's not only wrong on the facts, but precisely the wrong attitude to take. While I don't usually agree with Jeb Bush, I was struck recently when he suggested in a speech that we ought to embrace the energy revolution. I agree with this sentiment, Mr. Speaker, because the Clean Power Plan is a great opportunity for Virginia and our country, which we ought to embrace. It will be a jobs creator, helping to diversify and, yes, energize our new Virginia economy. I have some stats for you, ladies and gentlemen. The Advanced Energy Economy Institute and Virginia Advanced Energy Industries Coalition found that Virginia could create 6,800 jobs every year between now and 2030 by reducing its electricity imports and investing in clean energy sources instead. That would be a total of 122,400 jobs over that 18-year period, or 27 times the amount of all coal jobs in Virginia we have today. It's also about half of all the jobs in the manufacturing sector in Virginia, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The gentleman from Tazewell's story this morning was moving, even heartbreaking. No doubt some, maybe even a lot, of these new jobs will be in Tazewell or nearby areas and could help rebuild the economies in that part of our state. Virginia's 2014 energy plan noted that robust energy efficiency policies in Virginia could increase the gross state domestic product by $286 million and increase employment by 38,000 jobs by 2030. That's 8 times as many jobs as we have in Virginia in coal right now. This isn't fanciful, ladies and gentlemen. It's been done. It was announced last week that North Carolina, our neighbor in a state which is focused intensely on making itself a clean energy-friendly state, added 3,159 jobs in its clean energy sector in just the last year. And clean energy sector there in North Carolina now employs more than 26,000 people in full-time jobs. Meanwhile, here in Virginia in 2013, we had 4,521 coal miners, according to the Energy Information Administration, and only a slowly growing 2,800 people employed in the wind and solar industries here in Virginia. We need to move toward that tipping point where jobs in the clean energy industry will power Virginia's economy. It is going to happen, ladies and gentlemen. Let's embrace it and encourage it. Last July, ladies and gentlemen, some of the world's biggest and most influential companies, job creators, wrote Governor McAuliffe, telling him that they support the Clean Energy Plan and they want more renewable energy available here in Virginia. They noted that a 2014 study by Cirrus, Calvert Investments, and the World Wildlife Fund revealed that 60% of the Fortune 100 companies have set their own clean energy targets, and they've saved more than $1 billion a year in the process. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Mars, Virginia's largest privately held company, are committed to clean energy and are beginning to demand availability of renewable energy before committing to even do business in a state. Ladies and gentlemen, our constituents know this, and they support this. In a recent national survey by North Star Opinion Research, Echelon Insights, and Public Opinion Strategies, 84% of respondents supported taking action to accelerate the development and use of clean energy in the United States. And get these numbers: 72% of self-identified Republicans and 68% of self-identified conservative Republicans agreed. This is a bipartisan consensus. Why? Because Americans understand that clean energy is good for our economy, good for our health, good for our climate, even good for our national security. Now, here in Virginia, ladies and gentlemen, we're understandably and justifiably proud and protective of our low electricity rates. But Virginia's residential electric bills are among the 10 highest in the nation. The Clean Power Plan, focused on energy efficiency, can change that. Using energy efficiency as a compliance option under the Clean Power Plan, and by ramping up energy efficiency savings to 2% per year starting in 2020, that could net Virginia residents $264 a year on their annual household energy bills by 2030. That's a recent study by Synapse. Georgia Tech and the Nicholas Institute found that a 7.5% reduction in energy consumption by 2020 would lead to $1.8 billion in electricity savings for Virginians in that year, with the average household savings $325 on its average bill. An Advanced Energy Economy has done a new analysis that shows that under the Clean Power Plan, energy efficiency can also help lower rates. The study finds that efficiency improvements are sufficient for nearly all of Virginia's Clean Power Plan compliance. And under this scenario, the Clean Power Plan compliance actually saves money, with rates in 2030 reduced compared to business as usual. One scenario concludes that 91% of needed Clean Power Plan reductions can be met through energy efficiency alone. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the midst of an energy revolution. Virginia, the state which led the American Revolution, should now be leading the energy revolution. There will be disruption to the way we have done things in the past, but that's hardly unusual. One doesn't see many blacksmiths these days, ladies and gentlemen. The Industrial Revolution created new opportunities for those folks. In my real-world job as an attorney, I used to represent the folks who ran the payphone business. You'll look long and hard these days for a payphone. Those folks are all doing different things now. A little more than a decade ago, video stores built fortunes and were huge employers. They're gone. And just 5 years ago, no one in this chamber had ever heard of Uber, which hadn't even started its operations yet. Just 5 years ago. Things change faster than they ever have, and Virginia ought to be leading the way, not resisting that change, creating roadblocks to the Clean Power Plan, which HB 2 does, and creating roadblocks to the enormous and important opportunities the Clean Power Plan creates is the wrong direction. I urge a no vote on HB 2. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Hugo.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak to the motion.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, we've heard from the eloquent speech from the gentleman from Tazewell about how this is devastating. This proposal is going to devastate Southwest Virginia and what it's done to the coal miners and the coal families and the whole economy in Southwest Virginia. But this is beyond Southwest Virginia. This bill is going to help all of Virginians. If you look, and we heard the gentleman say that one of the things we should be proud of are the low rates, electric rates we have in Virginia. That's why, if you're in Northern Virginia, that's why we have all these data farms. That's why we have business. Hampton Roads, the shipyard relies on electricity. So many things, it's important. These are not our numbers. The State Corporation Commission said that the plan is currently implemented, when implemented, will cost rates to go up 40%. Now, 40%. Now, I believe you had a minority leader at one point who got in a fight over the rates down in Southwest Virginia, and everybody called him on it. Now, my friends from Northern Virginia, when we had all these snow calls today, wait till the rates go up 40% on your constituents. Because they're not going to call DEQ, they're not going to call the administration, they're going to call all of us and say, why are my rates up 40%? And the problem is, it's not just jobs. When we had the administration before the committee the other day, I asked them point blank, I said, tell me what your plan is, not just to help business, to help the poor. Because what are we going to do? All of us represent somebody that's lower income and poor. What are we going to do about those folks? What do we say to the family that says, you know, my rates are up, electricity's up 40%, I've got to heat the house or I've got to buy the kids' shoes? I've got to heat the house or I make the car payment. That's what you're going to force people to do. That's what this bill is trying to save us from doing. They're trying to save us from that call. And the administration, when I asked them, I said, tell me your plan. What is the plan that you have when the rates go up on the family that can't afford it, when the rates go up on the most vulnerable among us? And the answer was, no, there wasn't one. Nothing. Crickets. They said, well, we'll think about that when we get to that right time. Well, the time to think about it is now, because the plan that you're trying to kill will help us not have 40% increase in rates. This bill, I appreciate all the comments from Southwest Virginia. It is right, it's destroying, but I ask all of my friends, think about what it's going to do to businesses in your area when your businesses have a 40% spike in rates, what it's going to do to the families in your area when they got to decide between shoes and rent and the car payment. And so this bill is good for Southwest Virginia, it's good for Hampton Roads, it's good for Northern Virginia, it's good for the Valley, it's good for everyone. And ladies and gentlemen, the gentleman, Delegate O'Quinn, has brought a bill that is good for the most vulnerable among us. I hope we'll pass this bill, go on it, pass the Senate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Scott, Mr. Kilgore.
Mr.
Good for you. Gentleman from Scott, Mr. Kilgore, moves the pending questions. May his favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Pending questions called for. The pending question is on shall the bill be engrossed and passed to the third reading. So may his favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. That was on the pending question, wasn't it? Yeah. Pending question is called for. Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to a third reading? May his favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Bill is engrossed and passed to a third reading.
Continuing with the calendar, House bills on second reading, regular calendar, House Bill 18, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to the status of a franchisee and its employees as employees of the franchisor. Report from the Committee on Commerce and Labor.
The gentleman from Botetourt, Mr. Head.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 18 seeks to maintain the independent nature of franchisees by simply stating that the employees of an individual franchise cannot be considered co-employees of the franchisor. This bill is similar to legislation that was passed in Tennessee, Texas, Louisiana, and Michigan, and also legislation that is pending in Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Indiana, Ohio, Wyoming, and Colorado. It also has the strong support of the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, many local chambers of commerce throughout the Commonwealth, and also the National Federation of Independent Businesses. I hope it'll be the will of the body to engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HB 18 states that neither a franchisee nor a franchisee's employee shall be deemed an employee of the franchisor for any purpose. This provision amends Virginia Code 40, Section 41-2, which governs the state OSHA plan as administered by the Department of Labor and Industry, which is something we don't have to do, ladies and gentlemen. It's something we have chosen to do instead of letting the federal government operate and oversee our safety and health programs. The bill seeks to carve out from the state's safety and health enforcement any company that calls itself a franchisor, no matter what the facts are regarding that particular purported franchise agreement. Mr. Speaker, this is inconsistent with virtually all judicial precedents which require a case-by-case, fact-based assessment of whether a franchisor is responsible for the working conditions of the franchisee. This is a matter of discovery in a court case. Lots of case law. All franchise relationships are different. Therefore, courts and agencies evaluate the actual nature of the franchise relationship to assess the level of operational control by the franchisor. Relevant factors include the power of the franchisor to hire and fire, to supervise and control work schedules and conditions of employment, to determine the rate and method of pay, and to manage employment records. If a franchisor calls all the shots in terms of hiring and firing, safety, and working conditions, why should we be prevented from holding that franchisor responsible as the employer? If this amendment passes, companies can simply call themselves franchisees to evade health and safety liability. A company could fully control all operational aspects of another entity and yet bear no responsibility. If a so-called franchisor directs its so-called franchisee to create hazardous working conditions, shouldn't it be held responsible for deaths or injuries? Currently, Virginia has the right to control our own state OSHA plan. Under federal law, our state's plan must be, quote, at least as effective as the federal program that's found in 29 U.S. Code 667. Federal OSHA does not have a blanket immunization of all franchises from safety and health enforcement. Rather, it conducts a fact-based inquiry into whether a franchisor controls the day-to-day operations of its franchisees. If we adopt a blanket immunity for all so-called franchises, our state plan will not be, quote, as effective as the federal plan, and we might risk jeopardizing our right to have a state plan and control worker and health safety in our state through our own Bureau of Labor and Industry. Mr. Speaker, Virginia should not declare that no franchisors ever are joint employers of their franchise employees, as this bill does. This would encourage fraudulent misclassifications of companies as franchises, could increase workplace hazards and violations of employment laws, and could jeopardize the state's control over our OSHA program, as I said. Lastly, this amendment has the potential of encouraging employers to skirt the law by taking advantage of a new loophole. All franchise relationships are different. Therefore, we should continue to allow our courts and agencies to actually evaluate the facts in every case and to assess the operational control by their franchisor and their responsibilities to their employees and franchisees. That's why I would urge the body to vote no on this bill. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this is a really important bill, and I say that having been a franchisor with 143 territories across the U.S. and all 50 states. And the reason why it's so important is franchisees is where entrepreneurism starts. It's that person that wants to be that business owner, but they want a proven business model to go out there with, and they want the flexibility to be able to create the business as they see fit for themselves, as well as what's in the best interest of their customers and their employees. The more liability you put on the franchisor, the less flexibility they have. I can tell you from personal experience, the more we felt liable for what my franchisees did in Colorado, the less flexibility they had, and the more I was looking over their shoulders. This bill truly segregates that whole employee base that in many cases isn't even in the same state or the same city as the franchisor from those franchisees, and allows those franchisees to opt independently, to have that flexibility. And what's even better, Mr. Speaker, is many of those franchisees then branch out and become an entrepreneur on their own and start their own brands with their own business model and hire more employees. And if we go down this slippery slope of putting liability on top of the franchisor, well, it leads into unemployment insurance liability, healthcare insurance liability, legal liability, which I'm sure some of the other attorneys here can speak about. And it really not just at that point starts to kill jobs, but it starts to really kill entrepreneurs. And for that reason, I'd hope we support this measure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Botetourt, Mr. Head.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
And in response to the gentleman from Fairfax, one of the things to clarify, when you're dealing with franchising, you can call yourself a franchise, but just because someone says, I have a franchise or they are a franchise, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is what they are. This bill specifically identifies that franchisee and franchisor have the same meaning as are described and outlined in the Federal Code of Regulations. That's a very specific window. A franchisor has specific limitations on what it can and cannot do. Franchising requires the issuance of a disclosure document, a uniform document that gives all of the things that are the regulations that a franchisor can control, which can operate the operational procedures of the business, the method of doing things, a business plan, if you will, but it doesn't give any franchisor the opportunity to step in and hire, fire, and control the individual employees of a small franchise unit that is an independent business. The whole point of franchising is so that those franchisees, as my colleague just mentioned, have the independence to operate as entrepreneurs. In Virginia, we have thousands of franchises that operate under those proper parameters. We have tens of thousands of employees. It is critically important, though, to the operation of those franchises that the franchisee be able to maintain their independence. So just to clarify, this is not for anyone who wants to call themselves a franchise. It would be impossible for someone to turn around and declare themselves a franchise without meeting those federal requirements. And so therefore, it makes no sense to oppose it on those grounds, and I would urge the engrossment in passing on this bill.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Sickles.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentleman from Botetourt yield for a question?
Gentleman yield.
I'd be happy to yield.
Is the gentleman from Botetourt saying that whether or not you are a franchisee or franchisor still a matter of discovery and fact in any type of dispute or litigation?
Mr. Speaker, I would reply to the gentleman that I am not an attorney, and so I am not qualified to answer that question with absolute certainty, but my understanding would be that in a point of discovery, determining whether they are or are not a franchisee or a franchisor would have to be discovered, and at that point, the applicability of this particular piece of legislation would be, that's when that would apply.
Mr. Speaker, further question.
Gentleman yield.
I'll be happy to yield.
Thank you. I appreciate the gentleman's answer to that, which begs the question of why we need this bill. I don't know why we need this bill if this is still going to be, when we're saying here, we're making this declarative statement, neither a franchisee nor a franchisee's employees shall be deemed an employee for the franchisor for any purpose. I mean, I don't know why we need that if this is still subject of a point in litigation.
Mr. Speaker, I would say to the gentleman that clarification is oftentimes what we need in code. This again clarifies that franchisees are independent from franchisors and their employees are not part of the employment of the franchisor.
The question is, shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? Those in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Continuing with the calendar, House Bill 131, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to participation in public school interscholastic programs by students who receive home instruction. Report to the Committee on Education.
Shall the bill be engrossed?
We're fine.
We've heard this 82 times, but let's hear it an 83rd time. Gentleman from Albemarle, Mr. Bell.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, this is the annual Tebow bill, and the bill is a bill that would allow a locality to let homeschoolers participate in sports and other competitive activities at the local high school. Now, just to emphasize some of the questions that have come up year after year, this would apply to the 6,000 homeschoolers that are of high school age. Those in middle school and in grade school already have this power because the localities can already do this. It would only apply to those students that are the right age and live in the right school. So you can't pick a school, you can't go across town. It would be the school you could walk into and actually play if you just wanted to enroll at the local high school. It only applies to those kids that are testing and passing and have done it for 2 years. So there's no chance that a student could fail, immediately term himself a homeschooler, and come back onto the team. It's entirely a local option. Each county would be allowed to say, homeschoolers in my county can or cannot participate. So if Madison County said, we want our homeschoolers, we need them for the team, and the Greene County said, we don't want ours, Greene County would have none, Madison County would have it. It sunsets after 5 years, so if this is a bad idea, in 5 years it'll go away. And I will tell you that no state that has taken this step, and a majority of states have ever reversed themselves. The parade of horribles we hear every year has never turned out to be the case, and I predict that 5 years from now we would pass it without any objection, but it does sunset after 5 years. And last, this is only a chance to try out. It does not assure the homeschoolers of a place on the team. They will be allowed to go to the school, to approach the coach, and get a chance to try, but there's no way they would automatically get a spot. Mr. Speaker, this has passed the House for the last several years. I hope it will be the pleasure of the body to engross the bill and pass it on to a third reading.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Simon.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I will be brief. This is something we've heard before. Am I speaking to the bill?
Gentleman has the floor.
And now I'll briefly speak. Public education is a right, a constitutional right in Virginia, but participation in sports and other extracurricular activities is a privilege. If families want their children to participate in interscholastic sports, they need to be willing to play by the same rules as everyone else, and that includes academic eligibility. Student athletes who play against teams from across the state ought to know that the opponents that they're playing against are playing by the same rules that they are. So if folks in Madison County are playing in Greene County, the players in Madison ought to have the same eligibility requirements as the players in Greene. So the fact that it's described as local option doesn't assure that everybody's going to play by the same rules. And here's what's really happening. What's happening is we've got the Virginia High School Athletic League, which has been around since 1913, regulates over 200,000 public school students in their participation, and they have 13 individual eligibility requirements. And that's worked great, and it works great for every year. You don't need this bill if your school system wants to allow homeschoolers to play. They can allow homeschoolers to play in their sports leagues in Greene County, and they need to go find some other leagues that think that's okay. And if they find a bunch of other leagues in other counties that want to play by those rules, they can form their own league. What this bill says is that you may not participate, Fairfax County or Loudoun County or Arlington County, in the Virginia High School Athletic League unless they change their policies to allow homeschool kids, because we in the General Assembly don't like the policies that the Virginia High School League has set up. So there's nothing now that prohibits a locality from allowing homeschool kids to play if they want to. They just can't join the Virginia High School Athletic League right now because Virginia High School League says that you've got to go to school, you've got to be enrolled in 5 classes, you've got to be passing your 5 classes, you've got to do that year after year. So, Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I think I know how this vote's going to go, but I would still encourage you to vote no and not pass this bill on to its third reading. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Turning to page 18 of the printed calendar, House Bill 259, a bill to prohibit the Board of Education from replacing the standards of learning with Common Core state standards without prior statutory approval. Report for the Committee on Education.
The gentleman from Loudoun, Mr. LaRocque.
Mr. Speaker, members of the body, this bill requires that this body be part of a crucial education decision. I'm very pleased to say it received broad bipartisan support coming out of the Education Full Committee. And what it actually seeks to do, and I'm reading from the calendar, is prohibit the Board of Education from replacing the standards of learning with Common Core state standards without prior statutory approval. Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 52, a bill to amend and reenact 2 sections of the Code of Virginia relating to the Structured Settlement Protection Act. Report for the Committee on Commerce and Labor with a substitute.
The gentleman from Scott, Mr. Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we adopt the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Scott.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 52 reforms structured settlements, or the way that we do them in Virginia. And this House Bill 52 aligns Virginia law with certain provisions of the model statute that was recently adopted by the National Conference of Insurance Legislators, NCOIL. And what it does is basically allows structured settlements, which are payments which are made out over time to be sold in certain instances. Those instances would now require in-court personal appearance by the person wishing to sell. It would be at in the circuit court where that individual resides, and which would eliminate foreign shopping. Prior transfers must be summarized for that particular court, and also requires a clear disclosure to the seller of the annual interest rate of the transaction. I hope that the body will engross this bill and pass it on to its third reading. Sorry.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 313, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to administration of immunizations. Report for the Committee on Health, Welfare, and Institutions with amendments.
Gentleman from Caroline, Mr. Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, I move adoption of the committee amendment.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendments? May favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion agreed to, the amendments agreed to. The gentleman from Caroline.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 313 simply codifies those individuals currently allowed under law to give immunizations to our children, and the actual change that it makes is it also allows them to sign the form stating that they received said immunization. Right now, that form can only be signed by a physician, and all of these other allied medical professionals can give the immunizations. They just can't sign the form. This just lets them sign the form. They actually gave it, and that becomes a part of the legal record going forward for school verification prior to enrollment. Hope it be the pleasure of the body to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Turning to page 19 of the printed calendar, House Bill 1220, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to electric utility rate making, recovery of costs of facilities. Report for the Committee on Commerce and Labor with an amendment.
Gentleman from Newport News, Mr. Yancey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move adoption of the committee amendment.
The questions on adoption of the committee amendment, as many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from Newport News.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, House Bill 1220 is a technical correction bill for the solar legislation passed last year. What the bill before you does is to put the code back in the same posture it was last year with regard to power plant projects. The need for the emergency clause is so that the provision of this act can apply to the Greensville County Natural Gas Power Station. Mr. Speaker, I move engrossment of the bill and pass on to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Mr. Speaker, returning to page 14 of the printed calendar, House Bill 568, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to the Virginia Guaranteed Assistance Program grants. Report for the Committee on Appropriations.
Gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HB 568 deals with financial aid. This year, if you look at the governor's budget, he has $48.2 million in financial aid. This will result in a total package of about $190 million annually in financial aid. And one of the things we've been trying to work on up in appropriations is if we're going to do financial aid to that degree, we need to reform the process somewhat. So one of the things we've really pushed is retention and making sure also the students graduate in 4 years. So this bill does two fairly simple things. It basically says your award for financial aid will progress as you go from freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior. And that will reward someone for moving up. If you've ever been on a high school scholarship committee, you'll know that a lot of the awards are one-year awards and they're awarded in the freshman year. So I think this would be helpful there. It also would try to keep students on time and taking a full course load. So currently the threshold is around 24 hours a year. You have to basically at least take 12 hours and remain in good standing. This would basically be 30 hours a year to make sure that you're progressing. Please remember, you only have 4 years that you can get financial aid under the old bill. So under the old bill, what happened a lot of times is that you would use up your financial aid essentially in your sort of double freshman year, and there was none left over for your senior year. So, Mr. Speaker, that's what the bill does. This is my third attempt. It passed in 2014, 99 to nothing, in 2015, 96 to nothing. So I'm hoping for more success this year, Mr. Speaker. So I hope it be the pleasure that I engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Continuing with the calendar, resolutions uncontested calendar. Resolutions uncontested calendar. House Joint Resolution 31, designating the second week in June in 2016 and in each succeeding year as Chesapeake Bay Awareness Week in Virginia. Report for the Committee on Rules.
The gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Lingenfelter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this does exactly what the clerk said that it did. And other states, including Maryland and Pennsylvania, are also introducing a resolution that would pick the same week to recognize Chesapeake Bay. I move that we pass the resolution.
Thank you.
House Joint Resolution 87, designating April in 2016 and in each succeeding year as Advanced Care Planning Month in Virginia. Report for the Committee on Rules with amendments.
The gentleman from Middlesex, Mr. Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, advanced care planning is a process of understanding what treatments are available when one is at the end of life and the importance of documenting one's wishes for care they want or do not want, should they not be able to communicate or to speak due to serious injury or illness. The resolution, House Joint Resolution 87, designates April in 2016 and in each succeeding year as Advanced Care Planning Month in Virginia. I hope it will be the pleasure of the body to pass the resolution.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendments? Many in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The amendments are agreed to.
House Joint Resolution 88, designating June 30th in 2016 and in each succeeding year as Drinking Water and Wastewater Professionals Appreciation Day in Virginia. Report for the Committee on Rules.
Gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Lingenfelter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, the clerk is correct. This is exactly what this resolution does. I move we pass the resolution.
House Joint Resolution 169, designating May through October in 2016 and in each succeeding year as Virginia barbecue season. Reported from the Committee on Rules.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr.
Would you like for me to come up there so you can come down and explain that bill?
This is pretty serious stuff.
Mr. Speaker.
I had to get my number one guy to do this. The gentleman from Spotsylvania, Mr. Cole.
You better respect me now. So, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I tell you what, barbecue is so critical to Virginia that it doesn't just warrant a day or a week or a month. It needs a season, and I would move that we. That's right. I would move that we adopt the resolution.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
I just want to say that every season is barbecue season for me, but I wondered if it's time, if you have time to co-sponsor this legislation before it, or do I need to pass by for the day so I can get my name on it? Okay.
Without objection. Oh, yeah, it's going over to the Senate, so you got all kinds of time. Clerk will continue with the calendar. Okay.
House Resolution 75 has been moved to the regular calendar.
Shall the resolutions be adopted? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, no 0.
Ayes 98, no 0. The resolutions are agreed to.
Continuing with the calendar, House Resolutions, regular calendar. House Joint Resolution 163, confirming various appointments by the Speaker of the House of Delegates. Report for the Committee on Rules.
Gentleman from Spotsylvania, Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This just confirms appointment by the Speaker of the House of Delegates, and I move its adoption.
Shall the resolution be adopted? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, no 0.
Ayes 98, no 0. The resolutions are adopted.
House Resolution 73, confirming various nominations by the Speaker of the House of Delegates for the Committee on Rules.
Gentleman from Spotsylvania, Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this resolution confirms nominations by the Speaker, and I move its adoption.
Shall the resolutions be adopted? Resolution. Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, no 0.
Ayes 98, no 0. The resolution is adopted.
And Mr. Speaker, House Resolution 75, commending the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, report the Committee on Rules with a substitute. And Mr. Speaker, there is a floor amendment as well.
Floor amendment to the substitute.
Yes.
Shall the
Mr.
substitute be
Speaker,
read?
move the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. Gentleman from Toscana. Gentleman from
The clerk could report this amendment.
Clerk will report an amendment.
Floor amendment to the committee substitute offered by Delegate Toscano, excuse me. On line 38 after 2, strike the word waiver, W-A-I-V-E-R, and insert waiver, W-A-V-E-R.
You thought barbecue was fun.
Trying to pull something over on us.
Yep.
Gentleman from Charlottesville.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this is one little I, and it means so much because it is not really a typographical error. It really changes the nature of the bill. So for those of you who are not aware, all your grammarians in the room, waiver with an I is a legal term coming from the old French word waiver, which means the relinquishment of a right. Waiver, what we have in this resolution, is to hold firm. And when we're talking about the statute on religious freedom and protecting religious liberty, we want to hold firm, and we don't want any French words in our resolution. So I hope you can support the amendment.
Questions on adoption of the floor amendment. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Floor amendment is agreed to. Gentleman from
Thank you,
Charlottesville.
Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the resolution to some extent speaks for itself. It celebrates religious liberty, our statute on religious freedom, and it states that we in the United States welcome all faiths and would like to protect under the Equal Protection Clause, under the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution, the ability of people to worship as they please in this country. I hope that you can support the resolution.
Shall the resolution be adopted? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 95, noes 2.
Ayes 95, noes 2. The resolution is adopted.
Mr. Speaker, that completes the calendar.
Does the clerk have any announcements or communications?
Announcements for this afternoon and tomorrow morning committee meetings. The Committee on Commerce and Labor will meet immediately upon adjournment over in House Room D of the General Assembly Building. Commerce and Labor will meet immediately upon adjournment. That is a change. Similarly, the Committee on General Laws will meet 15 minutes after adjournment of the House. That's a change. They will be meeting in House Room C, General Laws. Commerce and Labor Subcommittee number 1 will meet immediately upon adjournment of the full committee. And the General Laws, and the General Laws Subcommittee number 1 will meet immediately upon adjournment of the full committee. They'll be in House Room C. Commerce and Labor Sub 1 will be in House Room D. General Laws Sub will be in House Room C. Then at 4 o'clock, the Appropriations, Health and Human Resources Subcommittee will meet at 4 up in the 9th floor Appropriations Room. Also at 4, the Education Committee's Higher Education Subcommittee will meet in the 5th floor East Conference Room. Then General Laws Subcommittee number 3 will meet 2 hours after adjournment of the full committee, or presumably immediately following the subcommittee number 1 meeting. Finally, last meeting for this afternoon will be Health, Welfare, and Institutions Subcommittee number 2, which will be meeting at 5 o'clock up in the 8th floor West Conference Room. Looking ahead to tomorrow, Wednesday, January 27th, Brunswick Stew Day. The County, Cities, and Towns Subcommittee number 1 will be meeting at 7:30 a.m. in the 8th floor West Conference Room, 7:30 a.m. over in 8 West. There is a new meeting of the Privileges and Elections Subcommittee. This is a rescheduled day and time. They'll be meeting tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. up in the 9th floor Appropriations Room. The Military and Veterans Caucus will be meeting at 8 o'clock in the 4 West Conference Room of the GAB. Also at that time, 8 o'clock, the Women's Healthcare Caucus will be meeting in the 3rd floor East Senate Conference Room. Then at 8:30, Agriculture, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources, they will be meeting in House Room C. And at the same time, House Education Committee will be meeting in House Room D. Mr. Speaker, the Appropriations, General Government, and Capital Outlay Subcommittee will be meeting at 10 o'clock tomorrow in the 9th floor Appropriations Room. The Education Committee's Elementary and Secondary Education Subcommittee will meet immediately upon adjournment of the full committee. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the Democratic Caucus will meet at 11:30 a.m. tomorrow in House Room 2. The Republican Caucus will meet in House Room 1 at 11:30 tomorrow here in the Capitol. Please announcements I have at this time, sir.
General Fairfax, Mr. Hugo.
Mr. Speaker, it's 11 tomorrow.
11. House Republican Caucus will meet in House Room 1 at 11 o'clock. Apologize.
Gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Mr. Speaker, I move when the House adjourn today to adjourn to reconvene tomorrow at 12 noon.
Gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox moves. When the House adjourn today to adjourn to reconvene tomorrow at 12 noon, as many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to. The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House do now adjourn.
Gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox moves. The House do now adjourn. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to. The House stands adjourned until 12 noon tomorrow.